entering into a series or kind of moving through a series called The Elephant in the Room. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take on topics that are huge and that could be super impactful in our lives. But oftentimes when these big, huge things happen or they're in the room, we don't want to address them. We don't want to deal with them. They're there, but we pretend that they don't exist. And that's the whole concept of the elephant in the room. It's big, but if we ignore it, it's just not there. And for me and for what we believe, that's not how God would want us to do. He would want us to address the elephant in the room. He will want us to call it out from the darkness so that we can put God's light on it and know that it's not something that needs to be hidden. It's not something that the enemy can tuck away and that he can use against us. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at. And so today, the elephant in the room that we're going to talk about is anxiety and depression. That's the big elephant in the room, anxiety and depression. That's something that is prevalent in our society. It's prevalent amongst adults and students, kids. It's here. It's in the room. And so let's just start. What is the definition, just a very basic definition of anxiety? And here's what it says under Webster's dictionary. It says, anxiety is apprehensive uneasiness or nervousness, usually over an impending or anticipated ill. It's a nervousness, an apprehension. I really kind of don't want to get involved with this. I'm pretty sure if I do, something's going to happen bad and it's going to go wrong. It's just that feeling that it's an eerie feeling that it's not going to work out. And see, many of us in this room, we've experienced that generalized or basic anxiety. I would say that 100% of us in this room, and even those that are watching, have dealt with the basic type of anxiety where we get nervous or uneasy about certain things. So maybe one time or another for you, something, a basic anxiety might have been, I have a STAR test coming up. Or I have a spelling test, or whatever test you take these days. We used to take those back in the day. But whatever you take, you have a nervousness or anxiousness about going in to take the test. Maybe you have a big game, a basketball game, a football game coming up, and whether or not you win or lose the game determines if you advance in the playoffs. And there's a level of anxiety that kind of rises up in you a little bit. And even for those of you that went to homecoming, that, I'm going to ask that guy or that girl to homecoming, and I'm a little bit nervous whether or not he or she is going to say yes. And you have this anxiousness about you, this nervous, pervasive feeling that something might go wrong, and you're trying to deal with it. That's basic. Even your parents, adults, go through the very same thing. They are not oblivious to this at all. Think about this. When your parents are out and they're making huge decisions for your family, whether or not we're going to move to another city, another state, how is that going to impact our family? Anxiousness sets in. Maybe they're getting ready to purchase a new house or a new car, and anxiousness begins to set in. Man, I hope I'm making a good deal. He told me that it's so much below market value, but I don't know, and I'm nervous about it. That's basic anxiety. But the type of anxiety that we're going to kind of talk about a little bit is more pervasive, it's more prevalent, and it's more, it has a higher degree of emphasis in our lives that could hurt us. And these anxieties are called anxiety disorders. It's a disorder, and here's what anxiety disorders are. They involve more than a temporary worry or fear. For a person with an anxiety disorder, the anxiety does not go away, and it can get worse over time. The symptoms can interfere with daily activities such as job performance, schoolwork, and relationships. Things that we do every day that seem normal become very difficult for us to do when we have anxiety disorders. There's several different types. They have their own different categories, but at the end of the day, they interfere with us being our regular, normal, natural selves. And it begins to fall and leak itself into our daily existence. When you go to school, it's like you don't want to go because you're so anxious that something is going to happen at that school or that you're going to be singled out for some reason. And it can be crippling and it can make you not even want to get out of the bed to go to places that you normally go. That's how anxiety disorders just grab us and take hold. Anxiety disorders are common in both adults and children. According to statistics, about 18% of the United States adults and 25% of adolescents ages 13 to 18 will experience anxiety. And that's according to the National Institute of Mental Health. 25%, a quarter, 1 out of 4, if you want to break it down to that thing, will have some type of anxiety. And so also the other elephant that ties right along with anxiety is depression. And I don't know if any of y'all have been through depression, but listen to what the definition of depression is. It's also a disorder. It's a mood disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite and time spent sleeping, feeling of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes even suicidal tendencies. They have certain things that overlap, certain characteristics that overlap, but depression grips us with this overwhelming fear or overwhelming feeling of sadness and dejection that I'm just not good enough. There's nothing about me that's good. I cannot be of any value or any worth. And it makes a person feel very small and even begins to have physiological effects. As we said earlier, sometimes you just can't sleep. It's a sleep disorder. You'll stay up all night, just even fearing, maybe even closing your eyes because of dreams or thoughts you might have in the middle of your sleep or at night. Your appetite begins to reduce and you don't eat. You don't even feel like eating. Depression is an elephant in the room, and it's real. And if you're in middle school and high school, I promise you, somewhere down the line, you will have experienced it yourself or have been around someone else that's experiencing it. And as Pastor Josh said earlier, this is why, even if it doesn't fit your bubble right now, even if it's not something that you personally are experiencing, it's good to know about these things, because one day you may be the voice that helps someone come out of anxiety and depression. According to the Science News article, 1 in 20 children and adolescents have anxiety or depression. At the time of this article that I got that stat from, that was about 2.6 million children and adolescents here in the United States that had experienced anxiety or depression. You see, that's the elephant in the room. Now, society, how does society, culturally, how do we view anxiety and depression? Oftentimes, there's what we call a social or a public stigma that's associated with these things. This is how the big elephant in the room can keep its place and everybody walks by it like it's not there. Sometimes society, our culture, our environments, or people around us will influence how we feel about this elephant in the room, and they attach certain negative feelings toward that. They put ugly words associated with the feeling that you're in. He's crazy, cuckoo, numbskull, nuts. They make fun, they jeer at you, primarily because they don't understand it, and primarily because it hasn't impacted them. And then because of that stigma that's attached, when it attaches itself to me and I begin to feel anxious, I begin to find myself slipping into anxiety or depression, I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want to let anyone know that I'm suffering in fear of the stigma and the shame that's attached to that. Even society, even those of us in society that maybe understand that it's a real thing, but we don't understand how to handle it or deal with it. Here's some of the things you might hear somebody with a good intention say to you.
I think that...
And you may have even said this to other people. Hey, you'll get over it soon. Hey, just snap out of it. It's going to be okay. You're stronger than that. Just think positive thoughts. There are people who have it worse off than you.
I grew up in a Christian household, and I was always taught from a young age how much Jesus loved me. Growing up, I was always a girl who was completely fearless.
These type phrases to tell us these things. And oftentimes those well-intended comments are meant to bring us back, but it pushes us deeper into isolation and anxiety and oftentimes depression. And the sad part is this isn't just limited to our society outside of these church walls. Even church viewpoints of anxiety and depression can sometimes be debilitating. That can sometimes keep that big elephant in the corner where it's visible but ignored. And again, I know from a godly church perspective, it's not that we're doing it on purpose to stigmatize you or to put shame on you, but it feels like if we don't understand it and we never experienced it, this is what you might hear. We often hyper-spiritualize the condition that other people are in. And you'll hear things like this: if you just trust God, He'll take care of you. Have you prayed about it? The Bible tells us to be anxious for nothing. Just give it over to God. Absolutely nothing wrong with those things in and of itself. But if I just tell you that, and I don't really understand what you're suffering or going through, and I haven't taken the time to really hear you, and I just drop a nugget in your lap and leave, and I don't help you process it, I don't walk along with you, even the most well-intentioned Christian who wants to point you to God's word as a way of moving you through that process can oftentimes cause harm. So none of those suggestions are wrong. They just come off as though the person that is suffering has something wrong with them. Why can't I get it? I go to church every Wednesday. I'm always in my scroll group. I share. I read my Bible. But this anxiety, these fears, this depression is still here. What's wrong with me? People tell me, hey, give it to God, I'm trying. He's not there, He's not listening, He doesn't hear me. And it can make us believe that God doesn't love us. And that is so, so far from the truth. He does not want you to be anxious for anything. He does want you to depend on Him. He wants us that can be in your lives to help support you in doing that and walk with you through this process. In the story in the Bible, if you ever get the Bible, get a chance to go read 1 Kings and look at chapter number 18 and 19. It's the story of Elijah. Elijah was a great prophet of God. This man, Elijah, went up against 400 or so, 400, I think it was 450 prophets of a god called Baal. And he challenged them and he said that my God will prevail over your prophets and your God. And he had this whole big elaborate thing. He called fire down from heaven and it consumed everything that was on the altar that they had done. And then he had the opportunity, as they had agreed, he slayed all of the prophets of Baal. He had one of the greatest victories that was ever written in the Bible, in my opinion. This man called fire from heaven, asked God to do it, and God provided for him. He was so on the mountaintop high that the scriptures say that he ran ahead of the chariots to the places they were going. He ran ahead. He was on such a spiritual high. He was a godly man. He had called on God, and now God had delivered. He was at the best point of his life. And then the word got back to Ahab the king, and he said, hey, Jezebel, my wife, let me tell you what I saw Elijah do. And then she made one comment, and she told Elijah, she said, man, if this day, may the same thing happen to me that happened to those prophets, if that by this time, the next day, you're not that person, you're not dead. Now, he just faced 400 prophets. And now one person spoke something ill in his life, and it spiraled him into a deep, deep depression. This man of God found himself deep in the wilderness, leaning up against what they call a juniper tree. And he was there. He was so exhausted. He was so tired. He was physiologically beat up. He was spiritually beat up. He even prayed and asked God to take his life. He went to sleep under this broom tree. And supernaturally, an angel of the Lord woke him up and fed him a cake and gave him some water to drink. He was so depressed, this man of God, the one that just had the high top experience. He ate and drank and went right back to sleep. Didn't even wake from his sleep. That's how deep his depression was. But God is God, and God is good. And God had his angel wake him up a second time and told him to eat so that you can have strength to do the things that I'm going to give you to do on this journey that I'm going to send you. And I'm going to flash forward to the end. God then gave him a work to do. He said, I want you to go anoint these 2 kings. And then he said, I want you to find Elijah, and I want you to make him come unto you, and he's going to be your student. So this man that was isolated in the desert by himself, not knowing how to care for himself, was supernaturally cared for by God, was then given a mission by God, and then was giving support by adding Elijah to his life as one of his students or pupils, whom he was to pass the mantle to. See, that story reminds me of those of us that are in this room. Our church, our culture, our environment can support you. God will do what he said he would do. 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. We have to allow God to care for us. Now, how do we do that? First of all, if you are a parent or a friend or someone that's going through anxiety and depression, here's what you can do. 1, recognize when something's not right. When your friends, pay attention, be vigilant, look and see what's going on in their lives. When you notice that some of the routines and some of the regular things that they begin to do or the behavior begins to change, you have to be vigilant, and you have to see it, and you have to recognize it. And then after you do that, this is what you need to do. Create a safe space and give permission to talk about this anxiety or depression that you see. I saw you doing different things. I noticed your routine is different. You're behaving a little different. What's going on? And when they reveal that to you, if they do, make sure you do it in a way that's confidential. You do it in a way that they can be vulnerable and transparent with you, that they can maintain an open dialogue or conversation with you because you're listening. You know, here at this church, we call that a relational environment, created as such that it's open to conversation. Do more listening than talking. Then, number 3, acknowledge the impact. Articulate, tell your friend or your son or your daughter that you see them and that you recognize the struggle. Avoid trying to marginalize it or, hey, it's going to be all right, it's not that bad. No, really pay attention and really understand the impact that it has in that person's life. Number 4, if it gets to the point, do not resist this part. Please direct them to a professional therapist or counselor or someone that has the expertise to talk and walk them through this. Now, how can you do that and be supportive of a friend? If you're a parent, you can make the time, you can check your insurance, you can search wherever you need to search, financially support the mental health of your child. Give them an opportunity to go into these professional settings and speak clearly and articulate in a safe way, and let these people give them strategies that they can do, that you can do, that we can do to move through these areas. Because guess what? Just because the elephant is in the room doesn't mean that he cannot be conquered and put out of the room. We have to let God care for us, and he can do that with people in our lives as friends. He can do that with our parents. He can do that with professionals. He can do it with medication. God can do it in any way he chooses, and he wants to care for us. And as a friend, support your friend. When they tell you these things and they might reveal to you they're going to see a counselor or a therapist, don't shrink back. Encourage them. Man, that's good for you. Go. I want you to go. Make sure you go. Encourage them to be in that presence. Let them know that this is not something that needs to be hidden, but this is something that you as a friend can support them in. And then I'm going to tell you real quickly, suicide. We mentioned it earlier. Even Elijah considered it in a roundabout way by asking God to take his life. But some people have really actually thought about it, considered it, and some people have attempted, and some people have been successful in the act of suicide. So if you suspect someone to be suicidal that you've talked to, you need to, first of all, if you would, be compassionate. Try to understand their situation, empathize with them. Try to see things from their perspective. Make an effort to connect with their emotions so that you can even get some sort of feeling of what they're going through. And if you really consider it, ask them directly and say, hey, are you considering suicide? Be clear and blank. Ask them directly. And then finally, get help. If there's something that's impending and suicide is there and it's on their table and on their plate, don't wait. Dial 911 if it's an immediate situation. If not, get them connected with another adult, a counselor, a preacher, a teacher. Get them some help. There's a suicide hotline. We all have a part to play in the lives of others in vanquishing the elephant in the room. Our personal stories have the power to heal if only we can set aside the stigmatizing messages that try to shame us into silence. This healing can come more readily only when we address the elephant in the room. Check out the video.
I grew up in a Christian household, and I was always taught from a young age how much Jesus loved me. Growing up, I was always a girl who was completely fearless, who felt like she could do anything. That was until around my 8th grade year when everything changed. One night at practice, I was going for a pass, and I ended up tripping and slamming my head into the gym floor. At the time, I didn't know exactly how bad it was until around the next day when I started feeling the symptoms of it. It turned really bad really fast, and my body didn't know how to react to it. So I was kind of in and out of the hospital for 6 months, in and out of the neurologist, trying to figure everything out, trying to figure out how badly my brain was hit. When I got the concussion, I knew something was wrong. I think my body truly didn't know how to act with it though. It was always going until all of a sudden I had to stop everything I was doing. I had to be in a dark room all the time. I couldn't watch TV or listen to music or do anything that could possibly make my brain think. So my body started becoming overwhelmed because of that. That's when I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I had just gotten out of concussion protocol. I was doing great. And before I knew it, it started consuming my mind just about getting this feeling and not knowing exactly what to do with it. I think for a while, I didn't know what it was like not to feel sad all the time. And I didn't know what it was like to go a day without a panic attack. So I would make room for it, and I would prepare for it, and it ended up turning into the most toxic relationship that I would ever have. It was always sitting down next to me, waiting. My relationship with Jesus was always my parents' relationship, and it was never my own. I would go to church because they made me to. I would read my Bible because they made me to, and it was never something that I craved to do, and it was never something that I found so much joy in. And I think through the concussion, through the anxiety, through the depression, that made me angry at God, because he was supposed to be such a good and loving God, but how could a loving God sit there and watch me fall under the own pressure of my own mind? I would feel like I'm gonna pass out, like I'm gonna die in this moment, like this is it for me. Just trying to get away from the war that was going on inside my head. I think that was when my hope started going away. So my sophomore year was the first time that I attended the movement. I was super anxious. I didn't know what to expect. I truly didn't want to get to know Jesus better. I saw him now as being someone who put me through so much pain. I saw him as being someone who didn't love me anymore. When I first came that night, I was sitting in worship, and I remember the worship leader singing a song, and the lyrics were, "All my dreams and all my plans, I trust in you." And at that moment, something changed in my heart. I knew that I couldn't live like this anymore. I knew that the pain and the hurt that I was dealing with couldn't be something that was in my life anymore, because Jesus had better plans for me. And at that moment, that's when I knew I couldn't do it by myself. Knowing that I serve a God who is able to provide a peace that I couldn't provide for myself was something that was so real and so true for me. after that, I never looked back, and I never wanted to. I'm telling my story because I want people to know that it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. That there's help out there, and that there's people who are dealing with the same things that you're dealing with. I want people to know that Jesus is the only thing that's going to be able to truly and completely heal you. There's medication, which is great, and there's therapists, which is great, and there's people around you who love you and support you, but the one source is Jesus, and that's something that I've seen personally in my life, of just being able to step outside of my door every day and still feel the torment and still feel the pain, but knowing that the Lord is my joy and that He's my strength. It doesn't have to be my own strength, but it comes completely from Him. That's what gets me through my day. That's what keeps me going, and that's why I'm telling my story.